If you've already got an iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max already, should you upgrade to the 16 Pro or 16 Pro Max for the camera? Well, long story short, no. So, thank you for watching. I'm Daniel, this is Zone of Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Zone of Tech, signing out. Oh, hold on. There are actually some differences that are worth mentioning that I was not expecting to find. So if you're curious about all these improvements, here's everything you need to know in over 34 tests. Also, as promised, we have now launched our lifetime purchase option for our app wallpapers. So for a one-time fee of $34.99 or £29.99, you'll get access to all of our almost 120 wallpapers packs. That's 1,200 wallpapers in 8K resolution that you can use on any device that you want, including desktop, made by our talented designers. And you also get access to all of our future packs as well, with 2 new packs launching every single week. We've got no ads, and you don't have to pay for a subscription either with this lifetime purchase option. Check it out in our app wallpapers by using the links below. So let's start off with some daytime tests first. In this first example of some beautiful British weather, there are some differences, although these are in favor of the 15 Pro Max, which is both brighter and also sharper if you take a look at the texture of the building. The grass in the foreground is sharper on the 16 Pro Max, so this seems to simply be a case of where they both chose to focus. In this next example, the 16 Pro Max did actually do better. If you take a look at the shadows of the tree, these are quite blue on the 15 as opposed to black on the 16, so there does seem to be some image processing tweaking that Apple has done here. And in this example, the 16 Pro is once again darker, only this time it is sharper in both the grass in the foreground and the building in the background, although you do need to pixel peep to even see these differences. All in all, we couldn't really test some proper HDR processing due to the weather here, but what I can tell at least is that Apple for sure has tweaked the processing to make their images darker and just a bit more contrasty on the 16 Pro compared to the 15 Pro. And sometimes these were also sharper. Now, if we move on to some indoor shots, the differences are very minor, but once again, we can see that the 16 Pro does manage to retain the filament of the light bulbs more than the 15 Pro, which does tend to blow them out. And the building in the background is also sharper than on the 15 Pro. And here we've got another indoor shot of my pasta bake, which, by the way, I did not make. This was from Pizza Express, which was also delicious. Now, if we take a look at the 16 Pro, we can see that it does manage to get more of the top of the dish in focus compared to the 15 Pro. Not a huge difference, but definitely worth mentioning. And the plate itself is also darker, which matches with the more contrasty outdoor photos from before. So what about zoom? Well, if you're upgrading from a 15 Pro and not a 15 Pro Max, you're now getting a 5x module up from 3x. Here's an example of what differences you can expect at a 5x magnification. Not much more detail, just a bit sharper. This 5x module is now the same one as you get on the 15 Pro Max and the 16 Pro Max as well. Now, if we take a look at some side-by-side, 15 Pro Max versus 16 Pro Max at 5x, I'm not seeing any differences. In fact, if you take a look at the leaves here, the 15 Pro Max seems to actually be a bit sharper. In the second image, also at 5x, once again, the 15 Pro Max is ever so slightly sharper if you take a look at the brickwork texture. At 10x though, the 16 Pro Max is sharper. If you take a look at the BBC sign, you can probably see that. At 20x, the 16 Pro is actually considerably better. The text on the truck is almost entirely readable. The contrast is improved, and even if you take a look at the foreground, that's also noticeably sharper on the 16 Pro. I was definitely not expecting such a big difference here. And if you move on to 30x, the 16 Pro is once again more detailed, as you can see the dirt better here. However, in this other example that does have some clearer texture and text, the 16 Pro Max is noticeably clearer and also with less noise. So it seems like Apple has definitely improved the AI processing at long zoom ranges, as in cases where text or clear textures are visible, the 16 Pro is noticeably better. Which brings me to the Ultrawide, the only camera module that got a significant hardware upgrade, going from 12 megapixels of before to a 48 megapixel sensor with 4:1 pixel binning. In English, this means that you'll still get 12 megapixel photos unless you manually enable Pro RAW, which we'll take a look at in a second. And comparing the two 12 megapixel outputs, I actually think the 15 Pro looks better. Here, for example, there's less noise in the 15 Pro's ultrawide shot. Even the trees on the left look sharper on the 15 Pro. Whereas in the second example, the 15 Pro has quite a bit less noise in the shadowy area over here. And lastly, in this third example, we can once again see that the 16 Pro's ultrawide is noticeably darker and also with more noise as well, especially visible if you take a look at the tree on the left. Of course, we'll compare the 48 megapixel ProRAW result as well, but at a first glance, the new Ultrawide seems to be a downgrade, at least when it comes to daytime shots. Now, there is one big improvement that we do get with this new Ultrawide, and that is when it comes to macro. Macro photos always use the Ultrawide and then zoomed in digitally, so now that we've got 4 times the resolution, macro shots are significantly sharper and with considerably less noise. Although this only applies in some cases, there are also some cases where I did actually struggle to see a difference. Which brings me to that 48 megapixel mode on the Ultrawide. So like I said, you need to have ProRAW enabled or HAF max for this in the camera settings, and then you'll be able to take 48 megapixel photos, which are definitely more detailed than the 12 megapixel ones on the 15 Pro, but I wouldn't say the difference is night and day. Like in some cases, I do find the lens to be quite soft, especially around the edges, so I'm not very impressed with that. Like even in this other example, the 48 megapixel ProRAW only looks marginally better than the 12 megapixel on the 15 Pro, and in some places it even looks lower res due to it not having that much post-processing sharpness that the 12 megapixel one has on the 15 Pro. So again, I'm not very impressed. I was generally expecting better here. When it comes to portrait mode person, I'm not seeing any improvements here. Okay, maybe a tiny bit sharper if you take a look at my facial hair, but nothing major. The edge separation is also identical to the 15 Pro. As for portrait mode pet, there are no improvements here. Both photos look exactly the same. As for portrait mode object, you could maybe say that it's slightly better on the 16 Pro Max. The edge detection is a bit improved, although not a huge difference. As if we take a look at a second shot here, they're basically the same. As for the 48 megapixel ProRAW mode, I'm not seeing any benefits of this new sensor, quote unquote, that Apple claims we have on the 16 Pro. Okay, maybe ever so slightly sharper on the 16 Pro, but the difference here is incredibly minor. I mean, even after editing them, the dynamic range is exactly the same, so honestly, this is basically the same sensor as we had on the 15 Pro and the 14 Pro in terms of how it performs. So what about video? Well, in terms of 4K 60 video, I couldn't see any notable difference between them. The 16 Pro Max was maybe a tiny bit brighter, but other than that, I couldn't tell any difference. The colors were the same, the stabilization was the same, everything was the same. Now, the 16 Pro Max can also record in 4K 120 FPS now, which will take up almost double the storage. The good news is that you still get the exact same dynamic range as when shooting in 4K 60. I'm not seeing any downgrades in terms of the image quality here. And when compared to the 15 Pro at 60 FPS, you still get the exact same quality, just at double the frame rate. The only downside, aside from the storage space taken, is that you cannot switch between lenses when recording 4K 120, and it can also cause some severe light flickering at night, so for me, I'm still going to be sticking to 4K 60. You can also use 4K 120 in slow motion. You do get a noticeably sharper footage compared to the 15 Pro's 1080p 120, with also a significantly improved dynamic range. However, if you want the slowest slow motion at 240 FPS, we still have the same 1080p resolution option as before, and here, there doesn't seem to be any difference in terms of the overall quality or image processing whatsoever. As for zoom video at 15x, we can actually see a difference. Same as with zoom photos, the 16 Pro Max is a bit sharper and more detailed if we take a look at the text, the building texture, or the staircase. Although the difference is not as great as with zoom photos. As for the Ultrawide video, the 16 Pro does appear to be sharper, but to me, this simply just looks to be post-processing sharpening rather than extra detail. We can see this better here in these bushes over here. Which brings me to night mode. And in this first sample taken with the main module, the 16 Pro is actually a bit better. The building in the background is clearer and with less noise in the sky, and the book swap box in the foreground is also quite a bit sharper. Same goes for the second sample right here, where the water is slightly clearer, the sky is also less noisy, and the building is a bit sharper too, although the differences are more minimal here. Whereas here, the lines and the texture of the building are also clearer, and the tree is also slightly brighter and with more shadow detail, but really, these are some very minor differences. So what about that new Ultrawide in low light? Well, it does have less noise compared to the 15 Pro Maxes, and some buildings like this tower here are slightly higher res. But then if you take a look at the building on the very left, that looks high res on the 15 Pro. I was hoping for some improvements here, but sadly this is just not the case. And the reason for this, I think, is because Apple is using pixel binning to merge 4 pixels into 1. But even that pixel bin size is just 1.4 microns, which, fun fact, is the same as the previous pixel size on the 15 Pro. When it comes to night portrait, at 2x, it looks cleaner and with less noise. On the 16 Pro, but then also softer than the 15 Pro. So I think Apple has simply changed their processing here. We can see this even better at 5x, which is just crazy noisy on the 15 Pro Max and then overly soft on the 16 Pro Max. As for night video with the main module, there were no differences between the two that I could tell. Same processing, same levels of noise, even the same amount of lens flares, which I was hoping to see less of on the 16 Pro Max, although this does not seem to be the case. Surprisingly though, I did actually find night zoom video to be better on the old 15 Pro Max. The footage is clear and with less noise, which is weird as the hardware is the same. So the processing in this specific case is actually worse. As for the front camera, daytime photos look exactly the same, with no visible changes to sharpness or image processing, and even the field of view is just like it was before. As for front night, you can probably tell that there is a major difference in clarity here. The 16 Pro Max is posed for longer, hence why the image is brighter and with less noise, but because of that, it is also way more blurry and out of focus, so I do much prefer the 15 Pro here. Okay, so this is a front-facing video test between the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So let me know if you spot any differences in terms of image processing, if any of them look better. And also let me know which one sounds better. Is it the iPhone 16 Pro Max or is it the iPhone 15 Pro Max? As for portrait mode front, they both look pretty great, although it doesn't seem like Apple made any improvements or changes here whatsoever. Other than that, the special modes like action mode and cinematic mode are unchanged. We do get some new things like audio isolation. This does actually work surprisingly well, especially if you record audio in a public setting. Okay, so this is a test of the audio on the new iPhone 16 Pro. So this is the audio mixing feature, and we're actually going to switch between the audio modes so that you guys can hear what each audio mode sounds like. So let me know, what do you guys think? Which one is the best? I think the studio is probably the best. We also get photographic styles now, which are very similar to the photo styles from the 15 Pro, just a tiny bit more customizable. My favorite thing about them is that now you can apply them after you've taken the shot, but at the end of the day, these are essentially just filters, and I tend to stick to the standard mode anyways. As for that camera control button, I covered this more in depth in my initial review video, which you can watch right here. I do find it to be a gimmick, as all of the haptic controls are just very slow to use, and I often find myself just using the touchscreen for them instead. Now, I do like being able to quickly launch the camera, I do like that. I find that to be quite a bit faster than holding the action button on the 15 Pro, although I wouldn't upgrade just for this feature. So all in all, I gotta say I'm a bit surprised. I'm surprised that the telephoto is actually better on the 16 Pro. I was not expecting to see any better results. And then I'm also surprised that the Ultrawide is actually worse despite the upgraded specs. I was assuming that this would be better in both daytime and nighttime, but that is just not the case. And I'm also surprised that neither of the key selling features of the 16 Pro's camera, you know, the camera control button, the 4K 120, are things that I actually use on a regular basis. But what do you guys think? Are you disappointed or impressed with some of these iPhone 16 camera changes? And if you want to see more camera comparisons, we actually did a video comparing the 16 Pro Max against the Pixel 9 Pro XL and the S24 Ultra, which you can check out right here. Check out our lifetime purchase and wallpapers, and stay tuned for more videos in the coming future. I'm Daniel, this means I'm Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Son of Tech, signing out. Cheers.